And we're live, and obviously this is not church, and it is not Sunday morning, but welcome back to Sunday School, and we're going to continue to talk about biblical feasts. Now, the reason that we are not at church today is that tomorrow, uploading last week's video to Rumble, which I should have done last week, but anyways, getting caught up here. The reason I'm not doing this on Sunday morning is because we are not going to be at church, because we're going to be at a different church in Montgomery, Alabama for my daughter's one voice choir performance. So she, for several years now, has been involved in the Alabama Baptist State Board of Missions, Alsbaum, state choir, Baptist Children's Choir for the whole state, and she got into what they call honor choir, which was the youngest age group, and I forget exactly what age they start, but it runs up to 12. And then when she turned 13, she graduates up into one voice if she continues to do it. So this is her second year with one voice, and their performance will be in Montgomery at a church in Montgomery. And so we're looking forward to that. Not looking forward to driving that much. They all met at a campground in Wetumpka, which is just north of Montgomery. So for us, that was like an hour and a half drive to take her down there, drop her off last night. And so we'll go back, we'll drive down there to Montgomery. The good news is my mother's in town, so she's able to actually see the performance and hear Rosie sing, as well as all the other very talented boys and girls. And so yeah, those are usually neat. I know with the honor choir, they did like a disaster relief thing a few years ago down and around Panama City, and that was really cool. A lot of gift cards and stuff were given out to help people recover. Money was raised and that sort of thing. So that was cool. Not quite sure with one voice exactly what they do other than going around singing, but it is a tremendous ministry opportunity. So anyways, we'll be looking forward to that, but we're going to continue to talk about feasts. And I didn't realize when I started this last week, and I got to looking at a group I follow called One for Israel. And there's another one, Jews for Jesus. They're Messianic Jewish groups over in Israel who are doing the best they can to evangelize in Israel, which it's actually, I guess to proselytize would be the right word. It's actually illegal. And if you want to be a street preacher like you can here in the U.S., you can't do it in Israel for Christianity. It's really interesting. And so groups like One for Israel, and you should check that out. Watch some of their videos on these Jews who convert and become Messianic Jews or become Christians. And it's just really interesting to find out how the Orthodox Jews and the rabbis and stuff actually treat the Christians over there and how they talk about Jesus. And it's really almost disturbing because you're like, wow. So, it's look up the group One for Israel. And like I said, Jews for Jesus is another good one. But anyways, while I was going through and getting my stuff together and looking for information on all the biblical feasts, and like I said, it's Leviticus chapter 23, there's 9 of them listed, and there's 9 feasts that the Jews as a whole nation celebrate. 7 of them are ordained by God, and they're listed in Leviticus chapter 23. There are 2 that are not ordained by God, And one of those is the Feast of Purim, or Purim as we would say, but to hear a Jew say it in Hebrew, it's Purim, like Purim, Purim. And so it comes from the book of Esther, interestingly enough. So we're going to talk about the book of Esther. We're going to talk about where the feast comes from and why they do it. And, and I say there's stuff that is ordained by God, so there's certainly things that absolutely have to be observed by the Jews to this day. 4,000 years later, since Leviticus was written down. But the other two, one obviously being Purim that we're about to talk about, the other being Hanukkah, which is actually listed in the Maccabees. Now, the Maccabees is part of the Apocrypha, and it is historical writings that kind of fills the 400-year gap between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. So during that time frame before Christ comes, after, because you don't hear any more from God about Israel as a whole entire nation from their final exile under King Jeconiah, one of those guys. But anyways, under their final exile into Babylon and Persia and all that stuff. So for that 400-year time frame before you get to Jesus, there's kind of this blank space in the Christian Bible, which the Catholics went back and added the Apocrypha, which included the first, second, and third Maccabees. And they're very good for historical value. They have no spiritual or prophetic value. Prophetic value is probably better than saying they have no spiritual value. They might have some, but it's not canon. It's not canon. The early church didn't even really get into the books of the Maccabees, but that's where Hanukkah comes from. So Hanukkah is not some sort of unheard of thing, and we'll eventually talk about Hanukkah. It happens right before Christmas for us, but it's not specifically ordained by God. It's something that man said we're going to celebrate, and we're going to acknowledge God on these days for this reason. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's you want to sit there and try and go, well, Christmas isn't in the Bible either, and neither is Easter, and there's plenty of discussion for pagan origins of those kind of things, or some of the traditions we do during Passover, for Easter, so to speak. There's, you can argue over Christmas trees and candy canes and different things with Christmas, and it's not in the Bible. It is clearly not ordained for us to celebrate the birth of Christ. It is through the Passover for us to celebrate God's deliverance, and he does that through Christ for Easter, as we call it Easter, which Easter itself has pagan origins in that title because that's a derivative of Ishtar, and that's a whole entirely different discussion. But if you're going to honor God, it's like I said with Lent. If you're going to do something and you're going to claim it's biblical, then it has to honor God. And that may be the only part of it, is that you're honoring God. That may be the only part of it that's biblical. But do everything you're going to do as unto the Lord. So if you're going to, pardon me, if you're going to have a celebration in the Lord's name, then make sure that it is something that will actually bless God in the process and help further his kingdom. So, that being said, okay, we're done with that. All right. The command to celebrate Purim comes out of Esther chapter 9, which is it's only 9 chapter long book in the Old Testament. And my Bible, it's like 600 page 627. So, but look this up, Esther chapter 9, verses 26 and 27. For this reason, these days are called Purim, from the word pur, because of all the instructions in this letter, as well as what they had witnessed and what had happened to them. The Jews bound themselves to their descendants and all who joined with them to a commitment that they would not fail to celebrate these 2 days each and every year according to the written instructions and according to the time appointed. So I was going to run through the feasts in order from Leviticus and get into all those. And then I realized this past week they were celebrating Purim over in Israel. So, hey, what better time to go ahead and talk about this one? And it's, to simplify it, it's like I said in here, it's a 2-day celebration, what's written in Esther here. And in studying this and reading up, they basically party. They have a good time. They celebrate. They read. They started off by reading from the book of Esther. They say some prayers and do things like that. And the kids dress up in costumes. They throw parades. There's even, for the adults, they drink until something about cheering for Mordecai, right? So they have a big party. They celebrate God's deliverance. Now, deliverance from what? Well, we should hopefully be familiar with Esther, although I think it often gets ignored and not looked at. It's a little controversial in some circles because God's nowhere through the whole entire book of Esther does it say Yahweh or Jehovah or there's no name for God. There's no actual prayers to God, although Esther and Mordecai in their communications are like, fast for me. Well, if you're fasting, you're doing what? You're petitioning to God. Why? You're denying yourself stuff so you can petition God for something. So clearly they're praying to God. So the whole entire book does point you to God. And it's interesting because there's parallels between Mordecai and the bad guys in here, Haman and King Artaxerxes really isn't a bad guy, but he kind of gets put in this bad spot to do the things that this Haman guy once done, but things do kind of get turned around. And so the parallels are there between like Joseph in Egypt and Joseph and Potiphar's wife and what happens to him. And some of the same language is used in the original Hebrew out of the Masoretic text that they translate all this stuff from. So they're clearly drawing these parallels between Mordecai and Joseph, Haman and Potiphar's wife. And so it's a brief rundown of the story of Esther here. Let's see. King Artaxerxes, depending on the translation you have, I've got a Christian Standard I'm working out of right now. That's a Charles Spurgeon Study Bible, and it's this weird Ahasuerus, King Ahasuerus. You might see it Artaxerxes maybe in King James or some other version. I mean, either one's okay. So King Artaxerxes is there. That's easier to say. And he's got his wife, Queen Vashti. Pardon me. I should have brought something to drink in here. But anyways, so he commanded that Vashti should come before him, and she refused to do it. So she disobeyed the king. So all of his advisors are like, hey, look, if you let her get away with this, and all the women in the whole kingdom are going to be disobeying their husbands because they're going to find out that the queen disobeyed the king. So that's okay. So Vashti's title is stripped. She's no longer queen, and essentially he divorces her, and he exiles her, banishes her from the kingdom, whatever, puts her out. And so now he has to find a new wife. He's sitting there after he kind of got over everything and realized what he'd done. He's like, well, crap, I got to find a new wife. And so he goes out and declares that amongst all the regions through Persia, now this is in Persia, somewhere around 486 to 465 BC, somewhere during the 4th century BC. And so we're talking about 400 to 500 years before Christ. And so he issues a decree to all of his regions that, bring me all the virgins. I want to pick a wife. And they're again, you'd have to go back and look at the original language of some of this to know exactly how this worked. But the virgins were all rounded up. They were beautified. They were prepped and put into royal garb and this whatever. And then exactly whatever happened next is not really clear, as best as I can tell. Now, perhaps the king tried him out sexually and determined who was what, or he just was doing like a beauty contest and they were walking by and he was seeing if they had poise and if they were actually beautiful and that sort of thing. So, and again, the Jews are in exile, so they're out there, but Jews weren't liked back then, just like in a lot of places they're not liked today, and they haven't been for many years in certain places. But when they're rounding all of the virgins up, here's Esther, and she was living with her uncle Mordecai, or Mordecai as they say in Hebrew. And as she gets rounded up, and she was kind of, hey, I don't want to do this. And Mordecai's like, look, just hush. Don't tell them you're Jew. Just go with it. And just, don't disobey and get yourself in trouble. And so she hides the fact that she's a Jew. And they round her up with everybody else. Well, she ends up getting picked as queen, obviously, right? Go back and read Book of Esther. That's why it's called Esther. And so she marries the king. He's pleased with her. And it says very specifically she was a beautiful young woman. And, was she 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, maybe? Somewhere in that. So she's like at least a teenager. Not much older than that, I don't believe. She would have already been promised to marry somebody had she been older than that. So she's a young lady who ends up being queen, didn't want to leave her uncle. And so now she's queen of Persia as a Jew. So when all this happens, Mordecai finds out that some eunuchs were upset about something with the king and had planned to assassinate him. So when he finds this out, he goes and tells Esther. Esther goes and tells the king. And basically, this guy Haman gets the credit. So I don't know if she went to Haman and Haman went and told the king, but he took all the credit. And so the king promotes Haman. He's this official, and he gets promoted. He gets to wear the king's signet ring and he gets to be treated like the king, even though he's not. And so he's going around and trying to, everybody needs to worship me and everybody needs to bow down to me because I'm the king's right-hand man. See, I've got the power and all this jazz. Well, Mordecai refuses to bow down. He's, a famous line that we all hear is, I bow to no one but my God and my king. So that angers Haman. And Haman decides he's going to kill not just Mordecai, but he's going to kill all the Jews. And so what I learned, interestingly enough, is that, all these English translations say gallows, right? So Mordecai has planned to kill Haman, Haman and all his plans to kill Mordecai and all the Jews. He has all these gallows. It's what the translation says. Gallows are built all throughout Persia. And he pulls some shenanigans and pulls a fast one on the king and gets the king to sign a decree that if you're not going to bow down to the king and his officials, then that's you're disobeying, and that means you can be killed, right? So the Jews were not bowing down to the king of Persia, and for the reason Mordecai said, they bowed to no one but their God and their king, and you know Haman certainly didn't fit that bill. But so Haman tricks the king into signing this decree, and so that puts Esther in a spot now, because when they learn in chapter 4 that this is Haman's plan, is to kill all the Jews, so now all of a sudden Esther has a tough decision, because if you went before the king without being invited, you would be killed. That was Persian law. That was the way it worked. And so she basically has to risk her life to reveal to the king, A, that she's a Jew, and B, that if Haman's plan works, then she's going to be killed as well, and that it really was Mordecai that found out about the plot to kill him, so it really was Mordecai who should have been honored and promoted and that kind of thing. So she does that. And again, personal risk to herself. She could have been killed for approaching the king without being summoned. But the king really had a supreme fondness for her because she was so beautiful, and I guess she carried herself well and did all the right things so that she was picked to be queen. And so what they kind of had this thing where they didn't want you don't want your leader going back on his word on stuff. So when a decree is issued, they had this tradition / law of not immediate, not issuing a decree against it. So once it's a decree, it becomes law. It's permanent. It can't be changed. And so when Artaxerxes finds out that Esther would be killed along with all the other Jews because of Haman, of course he arrests Haman, but then he issues a decree that the Jews could defend themselves. And that's spread all throughout the kingdom, all throughout Persia. There's all these letters are sent out that Jews have the right to defend themselves if anybody tries to come and hang them or string them up on the gallows and kill them. And what you find out as you read through Esther was Haman had at least 5,000 plus soldiers, men and women, men that were going to support him in killing all the Jews. And they were the ones who had gone out and built the gallows. But again, what I learned the other day was that the word for gallows is actually like the word for tree. And it's a similar form of writing that Luke uses in the New Testament. And so, he references the cross as a tree. So were these actual crosses, and some of them were very, very tall trees. So were they going to be hung like a noose around their neck from a rope? Pardon me. Or would they actually be crucified? Would there be a cross member that they would be nailed to or tied to, and hung, just pulled way up in the air? And the one he had for Mordecai was like 6 cubits high. So it was, I really got to look that up again. Cubit. But yeah, I mean, it was a very tall, tree, so to speak, very tall timber, piece of wood, whatever, for him to be hanged on. And so there's, like I said, there's parallelism with Joseph in Egypt, and there's foreshadowing of Christ and the cross. And, as you read through the Old Testament, there's all kinds of types of Christ. Just like there's types of Antichrist. This Haman guy is a type of Antichrist. Potiphar's wife, again, the language in the original Hebrew is the same when Potiphar's wife was trying to tempt Joseph to have sex with her, and and he wouldn't do it. And almost the same type of language and phraseology is used for Mordecai not bowing down to Haman. And so, Potiphar's wife was an antichrist, a type of antichrist. Haman is this type of antichrist. Um, Joseph was a type of Christ. Mordecai is a type of Christ. He's able to help deliver the children of God from danger to safety, to save their lives, and to preserve the nation. All right, um, so the table gets totally flipped around and turned. So chapter 4, they learn about Haman's evil plans. Well, then when you get to chapter 8, everything's been flipped around. And now all of a sudden, the Jews are all running around scared for their lives. Now all of a sudden, they can defend themselves. They've got God on their side. And over 5,000 men are killed while the Jews defend themselves, including Haman and his sons. And so Haman was strung up on the very same tree that he had intended to hang Mordecai on. And so, what man intends for evil, God uses for good. And so all this evil that was meant to happen to the Israelites turned out to be a good thing, because they were able to protect themselves and preserve their nation and their culture. And then you actually end up reading where people began to convert to Judaism. There was people in Persia, when they saw how all this went down for the Jews and that God was on their side, that the one true God was powerful and could work and defend them. Suddenly you had all these people in Persia who wanted to become a Jew. So, that's why it actually says in chapter 9, verse 27, and all who joined with them to a commitment. So, and certainly other people in Persia there said, "Oh, we'll celebrate this with you too." So that's the whole point of what they just celebrated this past week in Israel, the Feast of Purim. And it is biblical. It's not ordained by God in Leviticus, but Mordecai issues this decree because Mordecai gets promoted to Haman's position. It tells you that in chapter 9 there, that Mordecai is given charge of all of Haman's household. So all the wealth, everything that Haman had is now Mordecai's. He's now the number 2 guy in the whole of Persia. Does that sound familiar? Again, Joseph got promoted up to a point where he was the number 2 guy in all of Egypt. And so this is a very similar thing. So God used Esther and Mordecai in this captivity to preserve the Jews, to preserve the Israelites. And so, here we are almost 2,500 years later, 24 to 2,500 years later, and they're still celebrating God's deliverance from destruction. And so you and I as Christians, we have the same ability to celebrate our deliverance through Christ. And that's, like I said, Mordecai was a type of Christ. He wasn't Christ himself, but just as David and Moses, Abraham, Joseph, all the good guys, even Samson to some degree, was a type of Christ in the Old Testament. If you put all those Old Testament heroes together, you have Christ, metaphorically speaking. But they all had some aspect of Christ, and God used them to deliver his children, his people, the Israelites. And so there was, these different people throughout history. God has placed these people in the path that is able to preserve the nation of Israel, so that we get to Christ. And then, of course, Christ himself is Savior of all mankind, not just the nation of Israel. And so that's the book of Esther. That's the Feast of Purim. Like I said, it's Yeah, they start out by reading the book of Esther. They say a bunch of prayers. Um, they have parades. They dress up in costumes. Adults do some drinking. And so that is the Feast of Purim. So go back and reread the book of Esther. It's a great read. It's really interesting. And one of the guys I was watching in a video today is a Messianic rabbi, and pardon me. He points out we're in tough times now. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. The media is telling us a bunch of lies. They're telling us a bunch of weird stuff. I follow a guy, this guy Amir Sarfati, and he's over in Israel when he's not traveling, but he gets all this live news feed, these live videos from Ukraine, from Russia. He's got all these different news sources, and the stuff that we're hearing on mainstream media is not the stuff that's actually happening over there. And so, so we don't really know. And then what is Putin going to do? What are his grand plans? Is he trying to drag us into World War III? So, we have all this stuff that is really actually designed to give us anxiety and stress us out and worry us. And so, what do we do to get relief from that? How do we navigate the situation right now in the world so that we are able to, have that peace that surpasses all understanding? And of course, it's turning to God. And that's, like Esther told Mordecai, fast for me. So, fasting involved praying, and it involved petitioning God for God to do whatever it is he's going to do, or to do something. And so, of course, we know that, and I'll use the whole entire thing, that all things work together for the glory of God, right? But for those who are called according to his purpose, right? So as Christians, if we focus on God, and if we put our faith and trust in him, regardless of what Putin does over there, regardless of what happens in Ukraine, and certainly pray for the innocent people in Ukraine, pray for the church in Ukraine. It's really very weird that Vladimir Putin said that the Orthodox Church of Ukraine had to be destroyed and replaced with the Russian Orthodox Church, which is their state religion. Of course, nothing he's doing is really truly Christian. So, what exactly is their religion? What does it look like? And so, I've said all that to say this: when we're reading through Esther, it should encourage us, and it should remind us how God is faithful, and how God, if we seek him out and we seek his glory and his purpose, then things are going to work out for us. And so if we turn back to God, everybody loves to quote that, if my people who are called by my name will turn from their evil or wicked ways, I will restore their land. And so while that's a promise more to Israel, it is still a promise to God's followers, i.e. we as Christians. If we turn back to God and we get ourselves right with God, then he will heal us, and he will heal our lands. And, is it going to be easy? No. Are we still going to have a tough time with things? Yes. Are we still going to get sick? Yes. But it's so much easier if we put our faith and trust in God, instead of trying to figure out what the human solution is. So if we look for God, we're going to find him. If we seek to worship God, then things are going to go better for us. And it will certainly be easier to handle if we let God carry the burden. And so, just like Esther and Mordecai relied and trusted in God, and God, turned everything bad over to good, that should be an encouragement for us. So that's the Feast of Purim. That's where it comes from, the book of Esther. Again, it's one of two feasts that the nation of Israel celebrates to this day that is not specifically ordained by God, although Mordecai wrote it down in the book of Esther, that from that point forward they would celebrate Purim as a way to remember God's deliverance from evil. And so that is something that should encourage us. So I hope you learned something. If not, shoot me a message, question, comments, concern, prayer requests. This was never meant to be like a lecture series. It's not for me to just run my mouth for an hour every Sunday. This is for everybody to learn what's in the Bible. It's for me to learn. It's for me to study. It's for you to learn. It's for you to be encouraged. And again, if you got questions, I'm more than happy to answer whatever question it is. And, if I've got to address something on another video, I'm more than happy to have a discussion about something. So don't be afraid to pick up your Bible and read for yourself. Don't be afraid to ask a question. If I don't know the answer, I'll figure it out. I do these videos once a week, so I've got 6 days to figure it out and find an answer. And with that being said, I hope that your Sunday is blessed. I hope you make it to church. And I hope you're able to get something from God that will carry you through the week. So I will see you next Sunday. As far as I know, I'll be back at Lowrytown. Doing this on my phone, so I can't refer to my calendar on my phones. What is today's the 19th of 2022. We've got sheepdog breakfast coming up next Sunday morning on 27th. It's the last Friday of the month. It's every fourth Sunday, Friday. Every fourth Sunday. If we were Messianic Jews, we'd do it on Friday. But every fourth Sunday we do men's breakfast, the sheepdog breakfast. So come and visit and check things out. Get yourself in church. The COVID stuff went away because everybody went to war. So now all of a sudden COVID's not a thing. Right? So we shouldn't be scared anymore. So come back to church. The media told you that Ukraine's more important than COVID. So come on back to church. And I will see you next time. God bless.